Well, it's been a hot minute since we've had new music from Heavy Devi, who is quite prolific. So, more than a year or so without new music, we're always just like, where's the next project? Where's the next project? And yeah, we get a new one from Heavy Devi himself. So let's dive in. Lightwork by Devin Townsend. So, Devin Townsend, I don't think we need too much of an introduction from him. He is the Canadian heavy death metal, progressive metal aficionado, getting his start with Steve Vai way back in the day, and Strappy Young Lad also way back in the day, breaking off and going his own way, less towards like the big heavy metal and death metal side of things, and approaching his music more as like almost progressive metal and progressive rock in that sense. And he has put out some standalone like landmark albums in the progressive metal and the progressive death metal side of things, with Ziltoid the Omniscient, with Deconstruction, all of these under his own like name, and variations of them, because you have like the Devin Townsend Band, the Devin Townsend Project, and then just straight up Devin Townsend. So the last notable album that Devin has put out was Empath, the album that he released back in 2019. Love this album. This was like a very big cathartic release for Devin, where he took so many different styles that he had been playing with throughout his entire career, and basically just threw them all at the wall, both between tracks, but also within tracks themselves. And it was the first album after a very long stream of albums that he had been touring with the Devin Townsend Project that started back with Kai and ended with Transcendence. The lockdown, the quarantine, I feel like you can't really talk about Lightwork without at least touching a little bit on the quarantine itself, because so much of it really is knitted within the DNA of this album. He had put out 2 albums as just his own little side projects of The Puzzle and Snuggles. He also put out a soundtrack for a children's program, as well as a multitude of guitar improvisations, ambient noise albums that went even further than the albeit a little strange albums of The Puzzle and Snuggles. So coming out of that creative outpour and that creative catharsis, I feel like Lightworks is almost a direct response to that chaos. You can actually draw a lot of parallels between Lightwork to Sky Blue from the Devin Townsend Project, with it being in comparison to Empath and Epic Cloud. Both of those albums were a turn within Devin's projects and within Devin's work. Epic Cloud took this big stance. It was almost him going a little bit more mainstream. The songs were much tighter. The songs were much more accessible. They were much more radio friendly than any of the previous tracks that he had released on with the Devin Townsend Project, especially with the last 2 albums that he put out, with them being Deconstruction and Ghost. When he came to Sky Blue, it took that shift and tried to recontextualize it in a little bit more of a Devin Townsend flair. Now, this was paired with Z2 and Dark Matter with Ziltoid, and I don't really look too fondly about those albums. Anyway, I'm really moving across the field with this, but that same kind of approach, that same kind of themes and essences can be found within Lightworks when you compare it to Empath. Empath was this really stark change from what we had gotten with the latter bits of the Devin Townsend Project. It was a lot more personal. It was a lot more reflective. It was a lot more chaotic. And I feel like Lightworks is almost a response to that. Lightwork being a response to a lot of different things. So, with all that being said, where do we go from here? When I first listened to it, the first handful of listens to it, I have to be perfectly honest, I was a little disappointed. I was actually a little bit more than a little disappointed. It still felt like it was directionless, unfocused, very similar to how the Puzzles and the Snuggles were, because of how unfocused those were. When you compare it to how focused and how needlepoint precision Empath turned out to be, you just had to give it a bit of time. And even after I've given this album a number of time, I'm not feeling all that warm to it either, which, you know, I hate to do it. I just feel like there's no moment on this album that really captures my attention the way that Devin Townsend can. You know, like Devin Townsend is the kind of guy that as I'm listening to it, even if it's in the background, he will grab you and just be like, nope, you're paying attention to this now because of how juicy it is. And I'm not feeling it here on Lightworks. Now, even that being said, there are still some moments on Lightworks that I really do enjoy, and I really do, you know, I come back to a little bit. The main one being Call of the Void has a really interesting and intricate workings along it. I love the celestial signatures, you know, with playing a lot with different synth sounds and different, like, production sides of things, because I mean Devin is a mastermind behind the production and being the producer, but this is also an album that he is not producing. He contracted a producer on here, and I do feel as though he's not letting Devin really, you know, play to his strengths. I think that he did rein Devin back in, but at the wrong times, if I'm being perfectly honest. I do feel like there's so many really good guitar meaty licks, specifically on Heavy Burden and the title track of Lightworker. Well, I guess it's not the title track because it's Lightworker, not Lightworks, where there's some really interesting guitar motifs and guitar techniques that I'm like, ooh, that's really interesting. You know, we're getting back to almost like the March of the Poozers on a certain flavor. We're getting some really interesting like transcendence styles and licks on things, and a number of sessions and sounds that we would have heard from Empath itself. But instead of letting it just kind of run free and, you know, really bring about that wall of sound, I feel like a lot of that is stripped away, and a lot of that is polished to a point of, I guess, blandness, because there's a lot of sameness on this album, and it really does kind of suffer some of these smaller pieces on this album. For example, the last track of Children of God, it feels a little lackluster by the end because of how crystal clear and shiny it is. You know, it's not really allowed to really bring forth this big explosion of sound. The same can be said about Equinox, the third track. Devin has set up this really beautiful wall of noise and syncopated rhythm sections on this that we would have heard from, you know, if you had Ghost just smash right into a lot of the different tracks from Transcendence on it. But at no point does it ever really allow itself to explode. Does it ever really allow itself to really grow itself very naturally like Devin wants to do? So in the end, I'm finding myself less likely to return to this album because of some of those constraints that were brought on by the producer. And I know a lot of that was also just Devin where he is currently, and I always feel like every album from Devin is a cathartic release. You can see that. You can definitely see that. You can see how much of a toll and how much of a weight the lockdown has been for him, and how much he really just needed to get this out. And I don't know, especially coming off of such brilliant albums like Transcendence, like Empath, where I was looking forward to return to those albums and really diving in deep to those. I'm feeling much more of how I was feeling towards Sky Blue, where it was fine. I listened to it a handful of times. Nothing really came out that I was all that excited with. And I just kind of put it onto the shelf. And I feel like the same can kind of be said with this. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at for Lightworks. Now, I need to preface all of this that I haven't actually listened to Nightworks yet. It's the companion piece to Lightworks, and I don't know if that will help put this into a better context for me. I don't know if that will help me reevaluate it. When Nightworks come out, I'll do a full-length review for that, so that maybe it will. But for now, I will at least say that Lightworks by Devin Townsend is one that I would ultimately stream. So that's what I've got for you guys on this one. You know, I really do not like entering an album where I'm like, I'm less than excited, and it didn't really meet the expectations that I had going in. But I also have to remind myself that, you know, Devin Townsend's one of my favorite artists recording, and anything that's not, you know, straight up perfection, I'm going to be like, and I need to kind of put that behind me when I approach his music going forward, because, yeah, I don't want to be left with a disappointment on my hands. And I'm not saying that this one was like a straight up disappointment. I'm just kind of saying that, yeah, I probably won't be returning to this one as much as some of his other albums. And yeah, Yeah, and I can't even say that this would be a starting point for anybody coming into his discography. I mean, if you're a fan of him, you've already listened to it and you're already digesting it, and I know you're going to have a good time with it. But if you're a newcomer, maybe go to some of his other works first before coming into this one. Yeah, so that's what I've got for you guys. What do you guys think about this album? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. And that's what I've got for you guys today. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.